What if I told you that the Orlando Magic won the star matchup and still got humiliated? Because that's exactly what happened in Game 1. While the spotlight was trained on Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner, facing off against Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown, the real story unfolded in the shadows, where Derek White became a cold-blooded assassin and ripped apart every illusion of parity between these two teams. The Celtics didn't just survive with their stars underperforming, they dominated, and it's because they have what Orlando is still desperately searching for: a role player who plays like a star when the lights go up. The Magic did everything right. They clamped down on Tatum and Brown, forcing them into uncomfortable, inefficient looks. The numbers back it up. 33 combined points on 38% shooting. That's not just solid defense, that's playoff caliber smothering. And yet, Orlando walked off the floor, down by 17. Let that sink in. They won the headline matchup. Their young stars outshined Boston's all-NBA duo. But that didn't matter, because in the gaps between defensive schemes and rotations, Derek White exploded like a grenade. Points, 7 threes, uncontested pull-ups, step-backs over hesitating, defenders. It was merciless. White wasn't supposed to be the problem. Not the problem. Not this much of a problem. But here's the thing that separates the Celtics from a team like Orlando. Boston's third, fourth, and fifth options don't wait to be asked. They take over when called upon. And when they're not called upon, they still make you bleed. White is no longer just a glue guy. He's not a great fit next to the stars. He's a weapon. And in this playoff landscape, that's deadly. The Magic didn't just lose to Boston, they lost to Boston's belief system. A culture where everyone is expected to contribute, where the game plan isn't to funnel everything through two guys and hope for the best. In Orlando, Banchero and Wagner combined for 59 points. Nobody else scored more than 7. And that's not just bad, it's disqualifying. Can a team that depends this much on two players ever be dangerous in a 7-game series? Because the truth is, Boston didn't play their best basketball. Far from it. Tatum was clearly hampered. His wrist wrapped, his rhythm off. Jaylen looked tentative, possibly still favoring his knee. And still, Boston cruised. Not just because of talent, not just because of experience, but because they have layers. They're like a team of trapdoors. You think you've escaped one, and another opens beneath your feet. Derek White is the kind of player teams like Orlando spend years trying to find. He wasn't a lottery pick. He wasn't even the focal point when he got to Boston. But now, he's the difference between being a dangerous playoff team and being a nice story. The question Orlando has to wrestle with now is harsh. Are Banchero and Wagner good enough to carry a team that has zero room for error? Because right now, that's what they are. Is Jayson Tatum more hurt than Boston wants you to believe? The Boston Celtics crushed the Orlando Magic in Game 1. On paper, it looked like business as usual. A dominant second-half surge, defense clicking, role players stepping up. The type of playoff opener that calms nerves and confirms expectations. But something happened in the fourth quarter that shifted the energy entirely. And no, it wasn't on the scoreboard. It was Jayson Tatum writhing on the hardwood, holding his wrist, with a grimace that said more than words ever could. After a reckless, flagrant foul by Kentavious Caldwell-Pope sent him crashing awkwardly, the arena fell into an eerie silence. Tatum stayed down, too long enough to stir that lingering question no one in Boston dares to ask out loud. What if Tatum isn't okay? Yes, he got up. Yes, he finished the game. And yes, he told reporters afterwards that the X-rays were clean, but that doesn't mean the injury isn't serious. Clean scans don't mean full health. Joe Mazzulla called him day-to-day, noting soreness that hadn't subsided by Tuesday. Day-to-day? That's not the language of confidence. That's the language of doubt. And here's the part no one's really talking about. Tatum's already been dealing with wrist issues this season. This isn't a one-time scare. It's the kind of nagging injury that wears on a player across multiple games, then suddenly becomes a storyline when it flares up under pressure. So what happens if it flares up again in Game 2, or in a tighter matchup down the line? Mazzulla and the Celtics are playing this carefully, And they should. Boston has the depth to win without Tatum against Orlando. That's not the problem. The problem is what this reveals about the Celtics' thin margin of error once the real wars begin in the Eastern Conference. Once you face a Milwaukee or New York or whoever claws their way through, you don't win those series with 85% of Jayson Tatum. You don't survive those matchups with soreness hanging in the background. The front office knows this. The medical staff knows this. The question is, does Tatum know when to sit? Because superstars often don't. They fight through pain. They want to be out there, and they mask things until they can't anymore. Is Boston prepared to pull the plug on him early to protect the long-term mission? Or will they let him dictate his availability in a series that may not demand it, but could aggravate something they'll regret later? Some will argue resting him is the obvious move. But here's the counter. What does it say about the team if they don't trust themselves to close out a game without him? What message does it send to Jaylen Brown, Derek White, Drew Holiday? Resting Tatum isn't just about health. It's a statement. And if they do rest him and lose Game 2 at home, the narrative flips instantly. The pressure multiplies. The media frenzy begins. Is Tatum fragile? Can Boston win without him? Is this team deeper than it looks, or just top-heavy in disguise? One awkward fall might have opened a door the Celtics didn't expect to walk through this early, and how they handle that choice, whether they sit their franchise player or push him back onto the court before he's ready, could quietly shape the rest of this playoff run. Jayson Tatum. Injury. A devastating blow that could shake the Celtics' title path. What happens when the heart of a championship contender starts skipping beats at the worst possible time? That's the question now haunting Boston fans, coaches, and players alike, as Jayson Tatum's status for Game 2 remains doubtful after suffering a right wrist injury late in Game 1 of the first-round playoff series against the Orlando Magic. The franchise star, the engine of Boston's offense, and the keystone of its defensive identity went down in a moment that was easy to overlook, but may prove impossible to recover from. Yes, the Celtics won the opener. Yes, Tatum finished the game, but don't be fooled by the scoreboard. The real story began when Tatum hit the floor after a brutal foul, his wrist bending unnaturally beneath his weight. He grimaced, flexed his hand, and kept playing. That's what elite competitors do, but sometimes pain doesn't fully reveal itself until the adrenaline fades. The morning after, the truth arrived like a punch in the gut. Bone bruise, swelling, limited mobility, and a wrist that's been problematic in the past. And now, Boston's top scorer, playmaker, and defensive switchblade is teetering on the edge of missing a critical playoff game. The pain beneath the surface, the term bone bruise, might sound benign to casual ears, but to elite basketball players, it's a red flag wrapped in painkillers. Tatum has a history with this wrist, nagging discomfort that's flared up more than once over the past year. He called the impact jarring. The medical staff didn't find structural damage, but they also didn't clear him. And for a player who depends on his shooting wrist to launch off-balance jumpers and whip cross-court passes, that's a problem you can't tape away. Tatum showed up at Tuesday's practice, wrist-wrapped, movement limited. He participated in light shooting drills, but contact off the table. According to coach Joe Mazzulla, Tatum's doing what he can, but everything about this situation screams caution. And caution in the playoffs is just another word for vulnerability. A new crack in Boston's armor? Boston entered these playoffs with a giant target on its back, defending champs, league best record, loaded roster. But now, the entire postseason script could change. Let's be real, no one else in green wears the cape that Tatum wears. Yes, Boston went 8-2 without him in the regular season. But who handed them those 2 losses? The Orlando Magic. Coincidence? Maybe, but it suggests something deeper. Orlando's size, defensive discipline, and switch-heavy schemes are uniquely built to punish a Tatum-less Celtics team. And that brings us to the real concern. Boston without Tatum isn't just less dangerous, they're predictable. Without his ability to force double teams, collapse defenses, and open up passing lanes, the Celtics become a team hoping their system can hold. together under pressure. Hope is not a strategy, not in the playoffs. Jaylen Brown had a quiet Game 1. He can explode, but he's inconsistent as a primary initiator. Derek White lit it up, but expecting 30-plus points from him every night is a dangerous bet. Drew Holiday, clutch, but more of a stabilizer than a takeover artist. Suddenly, the Celtics' offensive firepower starts to look human. Defense? It's not immune. Either people forget how much of Boston's defensive identity runs through Tatum. He guards wings, contests shots at the rim, rotates with anticipation, and helps them switch everything from 1 to 5. Without him, roles get shuffled. Al Horford, already logging heavy minutes at 38, has to cover more ground. Peyton Pritchard, undersized and tenacious but vulnerable in mismatches, becomes a pressure point. And on the other end, Orlando is full of athletic wings who feast on mismatches and broken coverage. The Celtics might still have enough to survive one game. But what if it's two? What if the wrist doesn't respond to treatment? What if Tatum returns at 60% and becomes a decoy rather than a weapon? These aren't rhetorical questions. They're the uncomfortable possibilities no one in Boston wants to say out loud.